Is it something you were brought up on, Dick Tracy?
Dick Tracy is the great old American comic strip. You know, it was the first comic strip that wasn't funny. Dick Tracy was the first one that had violence and bad guys and good guys, and it wasn't just looking for laughs.
If you didn't catch the TCM special Tracy Zooms In on February 10th, we recommend you give it a watch. It's a little silly and a bit of a head-scratcher, especially if you don't recognize the method to the madness behind it. Mostly, though, it's a reminder that even at the ripe old age of 86, Mr. Warren Beatty is still out there doing his thing under all our noses.
I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised at how Beatty seemed to be so much more respectful of other people's opinions than I had mistakenly assumed that he was.
So, okay, what's all this about? Well, the long and short of it is that Warren Beatty owns the rights to Dick Tracy, which is kind of a big deal, not only for Mr. Beatty, but for anyone who creates. Intellectual property can be kind of a minefield, and it's important for creators to have an understanding of how to legally establish ownership of their work and protect it before you share it with the rest of the world. If you haven't done it yet, you should, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. But for now, back to Beatty and the backstory of his amusingly codependent relationship with a fictional good guy. In October of 1931, the Detroit Mirror premiered a comic strip written and illustrated by Chester Gould. The main character was a forensically savvy police detective who wore a very cool communication device on his wrist. No, it was not an Apple Watch. It was a state-of-the-art two-way wrist radio, which for 1931 was a very big deal. Anyway, the owner of this snazzy piece of cartoon tech was a no-nonsense, tough-talking cop with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. His name was Dick Tracy, and almost immediately upon his pulpy introduction, he became a household name. So what's the connection between Tracy, a figment of some cartoonist's imagination, and Beatty, a movie star with a resume spanning 60 years? Well, based on the recent TCM special, featuring a Zoom interview with the two of them, it would appear that Beatty and Tracy are each other's alter egos. A state of affairs which began way back in 1985, when Beatty purchased both the film and television rights to the Dick Tracy comic strip from Tribune Media. For context, this was right about the time when humankind was seriously beginning to process the fact that the new millennium was rapidly closing in. Along with the excitement, there was a fair amount of trepidation, and many of us soothed ourselves by reaching back in time to grasp at things we found comforting and familiar, things that had, once upon a time, provided a sense of safety and security. Modern nostalgia was revving its engines, and one could argue that for Beatty, his engine was powered by Dick Tracy. And why not? Tracy had entertained and sustained Americans through the gloom of the Great Depression, the uncertainty of World War II, and the horror of Vietnam. Perhaps Mr. Beatty recognized that America would appreciate the return of that colorful comic strip hero.
Everything all right, Tracy?
Fine, just a little trouble downtown.
Surely his presence could conjure fond memories of climbing into Grandpa's lap to read the Sunday morning funny papers. Then again, maybe Beatty believed he could totally crush the role of Dick Tracy if he had a chance to portray him on the big screen someday. Whatever his motives, Beatty had hopes of taking the old-school lawman and turning him into a full-blown entertainment franchise. The transaction between the actor and the media company was contentious pretty much right from the start, and both parties spent way more time than they would have liked arguing over it in court. 15 years after the 1990 release of Beatty's Dick Tracy movie, Tribune wanted to make their own series. Beatty, however, wanted to keep the banana-colored fedora all to himself and produce a theatrical sequel. If you've been keeping track over the last 30 years, you know that neither project bore fruit, which is a darn shame because the world of Dick Tracy has always had immeasurable potential. The names of the characters alone would sell merchandise. Breathless Mahoney, Tess Trueheart, Sam Ketchum. Apparently subtlety wasn't a thing back in the 30s. And the bad guys, Itchy, Mumbles, Big Boy. Yeah, who could forget Big Boy, with nary a good-looking one in the bunch. When Beatty cast his film version of Dick Tracy, the stars aligned, and their names were Madonna, Pacino, Hoffman, and Van Dyke. As a cast, they brought a retro innocence to the screen in a fantasy world that was as gritty as it was colorful. The movie represented an artistic coup, bringing Gould's old-school pen and ink aesthetic to life in a spectacular triumph of makeup, costuming, set design, and cinematography. Yeah, the live-action Dick Tracy was a thing of visual beauty, not unlike Mr. Beatty himself, some might have said about him in his heyday. Unfortunately, very much unlike the Academy Award winner and perennial Hollywood heartthrob, the movie was harshly criticized for having a somewhat lackluster storyline. But based on the amount of revenue it pulled at the box office, audiences didn't seem to mind that much. So why is Mr. Beatty so determined to hold on to these rights? One suspects it isn't for the money. Could it be nostalgia? Perhaps, except now, 30 years after the first film, the majority of people who actually remember the original are too busy trying to figure out if they're getting all the Medicare Part B benefits available to them, or whether they should consider a reverse mortgage in order to stay in their homes to care about Beatty's crusade to keep the Tracy rights. And it's not as if there's no other roles Beatty could choose to cling to. Instead, iconic roles that had a far greater impact on American cinema, not to mention the fluttering young hearts of our mothers and grandmothers. There was the handsome football star and Yaley, Bud Stamper, in Splendor in the Grass. So dang irresistible was Bud, he drove poor little Wilma Dean Loomis to a nervous breakdown. And then there was the ruggedly handsome criminal mastermind Clyde Barrow in Bonnie and Clyde. In 1975, Beatty broke hearts both on and off screen as sexy hairdresser George Roundy in the very naughty and highly lucrative Shampoo. And for 1991's Bugsy, in which he played the titular mobster Bugsy Siegel, Beatty walked away with both a Best Actor Oscar nod and an adorable wife.
The rest of the time, you're just another good-looking, sweet-talking, charm-oozing, happy fella with nothing to offer but some dialogue.
And let's not forget what can only be described as a lifetime achievement for the role of kid brother to Hollywood royalty, the lovely and lovable, beyond talented, Shirley MacLaine. Ladies and gentlemen, I mean. So, what is the deal with this Dick Tracy obsession? Is he just being stubborn? Spiteful? Some scoff at the idea of Beatty maintaining these rights because they believe it's utterly implausible for the 86-year-old to handle the role of an action hero. Yeah, they've got a point. It would be unnerving to see Beatty in a fistfight, or a car chase scene at his age. That's just common sense. But Tracy Zooms In is evidence that when it comes to star quality and acting chops, the guy still got it, even if he was all in service of some legal mumbo-jumbo associated with Warren hanging on to those precious film and TV rights, right? Yeah.
I guess you could say that, yes.
We're not legal experts, and when it comes to IP, it's hard to say if anyone really is, to be honest. It's a foggy space, to say the least. If and when you're ready to pursue a copyright to ensure that your work remains your work, we strongly recommend you refer to a legal professional, whether that means making an appointment with a local attorney who specializes in IP concerns, or by accessing a reputable online service, of which there are many. Basically, a legal copyright, which can only be obtained from the U.S. Copyright Office, is the written word's best friend. Copyrights are also very chummy with visual images, photographs or drawings, movies and video content, any original work that has been authored by you, the creator. To really oversimplify, if the execution of an original idea did not exist before you thought of it and produced it, it is defined as your intellectual property, IP. And if you don't want to see whatever prestige, glory, or monetary gain this IP may generate go to someone else, you'd best get it copyrighted. In doing so, you'll be granted the following rights: the right to reproduce the copyrighted work, the right to any future projects based upon the work, the right to distribute it, and then the right to perform it. Holding a copyright is not for anyone with a fear of commitment, because it means that you and your work will be in an exclusive relationship for the rest of your life, plus 75 years. Unless you choose to sell the rights before they expire, of course. While you hold the copyright, you can be confident that any individual or business who infringes on it will be going down big time. Having your creative properties copyrighted is like hiring a really large, really loyal bouncer to stand outside your brain and make sure nobody messes with your thoughts and ideas. Again, this is a very elementary and kind of silly explanation, so securing a lawyer with specific expertise in the area of IP is definitely the way to go, since they're not likely to use bouncer metaphors, even though those are pretty awesome. Okay, back to Beatty's current legal situation thing. The best way to describe it is that there is a trick to Beatty retaining the film rights he purchased, and it all boils down to this: use it or lose it. It's that simple. In other words, according to the agreement between Beatty and Tribune, the actor is required to demonstrate his ongoing interest in and dedication to the Dick Tracy property by producing the occasional project featuring the fictional detective. Sounds a little like a fraternity hazing strategy to us, but as we said, we aren't lawyers. In any case, it seems Beatty could have chosen to do just about anything in the realm of movies or TV to meet this weirdly bro-code sounding requirement, as long as the Dick Tracy character was involved. Industry folks and opinionated fans are calling Tracy Zooms In bizarre and, confusing, but we found the result to be sincerely entertaining, a fun, well-executed romp. Who else could pull off a parody of an adaptation of a comic strip which itself was a cartoon spoof of a real-life Prohibition-era police detective featuring the guy who played the character as both himself and the character facing each other down in front of two of the greatest names in film academia, kept perfectly straight faces while acting as mediators.
I have an old friend or acquaintance of yours here.
Oh, really? What? Who? Yes, we haven't spoken in a while.
Yeah. Warren Beatty as Dick Tracy, passive-aggressively dissing Warren Beatty in an attempt to keep Dick Tracy and Warren Beatty's comic book reality crossover partnership alive is nothing short of meta. Remember when everything was meta? Well, is meta still a thing? Maybe Beatty wanted to bring that back too. Anyway, legally speaking, there is no doubt that Beatty's efforts fulfilled the aforementioned legal requirement. Indeed, it would be hard for him to have garnered more validation for his good faith quest than he did by assembling the likes of Leonard Maltin and Ben Mankiewicz to champion him in this cause. It was nice to see Maltin, of course, and major props to the brilliant Ben Mankiewicz for injecting the perfect dose of reality mixed with satiric self-awareness. He was not the least bit cringy in a situation so contrived that in the hands of anyone else, it would have been about as cringy as it gets.
Who is that? Is that Ben Mankiewicz?
It is indeed.
How are you?
Fine, thanks.
Oh, Leonard, how are you?
It's been a while.
But again, what people just can't seem to wrap their heads around is why is Beatty so determined to hang on to these film rights? Many fans, and likely more than a few broad-shouldered, square-jawed actors in need of a career-defining role, deeply resent Beatty's desire to keep his stranglehold on the rights. But in Hollywood, an industry known for ageism, we say, an octogenarian's gotta do what an octogenarian's gotta do. Am I right? And after seeing Tracy Zooms in, it's hard to argue against the idea of Warren Beatty playing the comic book megastar one more time, in some iteration. The other important thing to factor in is that Dick Tracy will become public domain in 2027, meaning that in 4 short years, this all may be moot. Public domain means a property has reached that life plus 75 mark, and because certain legal hoops have not been jumped through by the creator, the work is no longer protected by your big burly bouncer. Your copyright. Fun fact, as of 2022, everyone's favorite teddy bear, Winnie the Pooh, finally stepped out of the 100-acre wood and straight into the public domain, at which time someone decided to cast the cuddly little cubby all stuffed with fluff in a horror film. Yeah, a horror film. Here's what we have to say about that.
Oh, bother. Double bother.
We imagine this supreme lack of respect is exactly what Warren Beatty is trying to avoid for Dick Tracy. So not only would we like to see him keep the rights, we'd really like to see him do something with them. And God, do it fast. Mr. Beatty, your Zoom was wildly entertaining. So, seeing you still own the rights, we've got a couple of pitches for you. For example, how about Dick Tracy versus Sharktopus? Speaks for itself, doesn't it? Of course, your wrist thingy would have to be upgraded to waterproof and... Oh, no? Okay, well, how about this then? Dick Tracy Jr., a cartoon Nepo baby, if there ever was one, takes the crime-fighting reins from his old man. We update the hat and overcoat, maybe get Tom Ford to redesign them, and Dick Jr. goes out and fights the Gen Z versions of your hideous rogues gallery while you, Pops Tracy, expertly advises from the comfort of your cushy desk job back at the precinct. And if Tracy Sr. ever does have to take to the streets, just promise us, Mr. Beatty, that you'll get a stunt double. A good one. Because we'd hate to see you get hurt. Seriously. So, if you've got a creation, like Dick Tracy, that you'd like to see kept safe, be sure to look into all your legal options protecting it. And if you've got that creative itch you just can't stop scratching, be sure to check out all the great creative projects we have up for you to pitch on at Tongal.com. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe and hit that like button. And while you're at it, let us know what you'd do with Dick Tracy in the comments below if you had the rights.